Picture this. You're a young peasant woman in 13th century England, and you've just discovered that your monthly cycle has begun. But instead of reaching for what we might consider normal hygiene products, you're frantically searching for scraps of cloth, moss, or even sheep's wool to manage your situation. Your mother whispers that you must avoid the dairy cows because your presence might sour their milk. The local priest warns that entering the church during this time could literally cause the building's holy relics to lose their divine power. And your husband? He's been sleeping in the barn for the past week because medieval medical texts claim that intercourse during menstruation could produce children with red hair, leprosy, or worse, demonic possession. Welcome to the medieval world, where sexuality wasn't just governed by personal choice or even religious doctrine, but by a bizarre mixture of ancient folklore, medical misconceptions, and social customs so strange they would make modern people question the sanity of our ancestors. Tonight we're pulling back the curtain on 1,000 years of the most shocking, bewildering, and downright absurd sexual norms that governed the intimate lives of medieval Europeans. Before we dive into these forgotten customs of desire and taboo, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. Please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient mysteries together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared fascination with how our ancestors lived, loved, and lost their minds over the most basic human experiences. To understand medieval sexuality, you first need to understand that privacy as we know it simply didn't exist. Imagine living in a world where the average family of 8 shared a single room, where servants slept at the foot of their master's bed, and where even the wealthiest nobles conducted their most intimate moments within earshot of household staff. Medieval homes weren't designed for solitude, they were designed for survival. This meant that sexuality wasn't a private affair between 2 consenting adults. It was a community event, scrutinized, regulated, and often publicly discussed by everyone, from village gossips to church authorities. The medieval bedroom was a stage where every performance was watched, judged, and recorded for posterity. Wedding nights, in particular, became spectacles that would horrify modern couples. It wasn't uncommon for family members, friends, and even local officials to escort newlyweds to their marriage bed, offer advice on proper technique, and sometimes even remain nearby to ensure the union was properly consummated. The concept of a honeymoon as a private romantic getaway was completely foreign. Instead, newly married couples faced what amounted to a public examination of their sexual compatibility and fertility. But the lack of privacy was just the beginning of medieval sexual strangeness. The church, which held enormous influence over daily life, had developed an incredibly detailed and bizarre set of rules governing when, how, and why couples could engage in intimate relations. These weren't just moral guidelines, they were specific instructions that dictated everything from acceptable positions to appropriate days of the week for sexual activity. According to medieval church doctrine, there were more days when sex was forbidden than when it was permitted. Couples were expected to abstain during Lent, Advent, and numerous feast days throughout the year. Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays were off limits. The weeks leading up to major religious holidays required complete celibacy. Women's menstrual periods, pregnancies, and nursing periods all carried sexual prohibitions. When you add up all these restrictions, medieval couples were left with perhaps 60 to 80 days per year, when intimate relations were considered acceptable by church standards. Even on the days when sexual activity was technically permitted, the church had strong opinions about how it should be conducted. Only one position was considered morally acceptable, what we might call the missionary position, because it was believed to be the most natural and least likely to inspire lustful thoughts. Any deviation from this standard was considered a sin requiring confession and penance. Medieval penitential books, which served as guides for priests hearing confessions, contained detailed catalogues of sexual sins with corresponding punishments, creating a bizarre sexual bureaucracy that turned intimate relationships into matters of ecclesiastical administration. The medieval understanding of human anatomy and reproduction was based on a mixture of ancient Greek and Roman texts, Islamic medical knowledge, and pure fantasy that created some of the most ridiculous sexual beliefs in human history. Medieval doctors, working from translations of classical texts and their own limited observations, developed theories about human sexuality that were simultaneously elaborate and completely wrong. According to medieval medical wisdom, women were essentially defective men whose reproductive organs had failed to develop properly due to insufficient heat during conception. This theory, inherited from ancient Greek physicians, suggested that women's bodies were naturally colder and wetter than men's, making them more prone to sexual desire, but less capable of controlling it. The medical establishment believed that women's sexual appetites were more intense and dangerous than men's, requiring constant vigilance and regulation to prevent moral and social chaos. Medieval physicians also maintained that sexual intercourse was necessary for women's health, but only in carefully controlled circumstances. They believed that women who didn't engage in regular sexual activity would suffer from a condition called hysteria, caused by their reproductive organs literally wandering around inside their bodies in search of satisfaction. The prescribed cure for this imaginary ailment involved either sexual intercourse with a husband or various medical treatments that sound more like torture than therapy. The medieval concept of conception was equally bizarre and medically inaccurate. Doctors believed that both men and women produced seed during sexual climax, and that pregnancy could only occur if both partners achieved simultaneous orgasm. This led to the peculiar medical advice that husbands should focus on ensuring their wives' sexual satisfaction, not for romantic or emotional reasons, but as a practical matter of reproductive success. Medieval medical texts contain detailed instructions for foreplay and technique, written in the clinical language of medical textbooks, but describing practices that would make modern sex educators blush. But perhaps the strangest aspect of medieval sexual medicine was the belief in maternal impression, the idea that a woman's thoughts, emotions, and experiences during pregnancy could physically alter her unborn child. Pregnant women were advised to avoid looking at disabled people, criminals, or animals, lest their children be born with similar characteristics. They were encouraged to gaze upon beautiful art, listen to pleasant music, and maintain cheerful dispositions to ensure their babies would be born attractive and virtuous. This belief in maternal impression created an entire industry of pregnancy superstitions and practices that governed every aspect of expectant mothers' lives. Pregnant women were forbidden from attending executions, visiting hospitals, or even looking at the full moon for fear of marking their children with lunar influence. The shape of fruits and vegetables consumed during pregnancy was believed to influence the physical appearance of the baby, leading to elaborate dietary restrictions and recommendations that turned eating into a form of prenatal sculpture. Medieval marriage customs reflected these bizarre beliefs about sexuality and reproduction, while adding their own layers of social complexity and religious ritual. Arranged marriages were the norm across all social classes, with parents and extended families negotiating unions based on economic advantage, political alliance, and social status rather than romantic attraction or sexual compatibility. Young people, particularly women, had little say in choosing their spouses, but the marriages themselves were expected to produce both heirs and sexual satisfaction according to the strange medical and religious beliefs of the time. The process of medieval courtship, when it existed at all, followed rules so complex and contradictory that successfully navigating them required expertise in theology, medicine, and social protocol. Young men seeking to court women had to balance religious teachings about the sinfulness of sexual desire with medical advice about the necessity of sexual compatibility, all while observing social customs that varied dramatically between regions, social classes, and historical periods. Medieval wedding ceremonies themselves reflected these competing influences, combining Christian religious symbolism with pre-Christian fertility rituals and medical theories about optimal conditions for conception. The timing of weddings was carefully calculated to avoid religious restrictions while maximizing the chances of successful reproduction. Wedding feasts included foods believed to enhance fertility and sexual performance, while wedding night customs involved rituals designed to ensure both spiritual blessing and physical satisfaction. But the most bizarre aspect of medieval marriage was how couples were expected to balance their roles as spiritual partners seeking salvation with their obligations as sexual partners, ensuring the continuation of their bloodlines. Medieval marriage manuals, written by theologians and physicians, attempted to provide guidance for this impossible balancing act, creating documents that read like bizarre hybrid texts combining religious devotion with sexual instruction. These marriage guides advise couples to pray before sexual intercourse, asking for divine blessing on their union and forgiveness for the sinful pleasure they were about to experience. They recommended specific prayers for different types of sexual encounters, different invocations for attempts at conception versus those undertaken for health reasons or to prevent adultery. The manuals even provided guidelines for sexual technique that incorporated religious symbolism, suggesting that the physical act of intercourse could serve as a form of worship when performed with proper spiritual intention. The result was a medieval sexual culture that was simultaneously repressive and obsessed with intimate details, creating a society where sexuality was heavily regulated but constantly discussed, where pleasure was considered sinful but medically necessary, and where the most private human experiences became matters of public concern and religious doctrine. As we delve deeper into these forgotten customs, we'll discover how medieval people navigated the contradictions between their spiritual beliefs and physical desires, creating elaborate systems of sexual etiquette that governed everything from peasant relationships to royal marriages. We'll explore the bizarre medical treatments prescribed for sexual dysfunction, the strange courtship rituals that determined romantic compatibility, and the shocking wedding night customs that would make modern couples grateful for our contemporary understanding of privacy and consent. The wedding night itself was just the beginning of a lifetime, governed by sexual regulations that would seem laughably intrusive to modern couples. Medieval society had developed an elaborate system of sexual surveillance that extended far beyond the bedroom, creating a network of community oversight that monitored and regulated intimate relationships with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Village priests maintained detailed records of their parishioners' sexual activities, not through direct observation, but through the confession booth, where medieval Catholics were required to report their sexual sins in excruciating detail. These confessions weren't just general admissions of wrongdoing. They required specific descriptions of sexual acts, positions used, frequency of encounters, and even the thoughts and fantasies that accompanied physical intimacy. Priests used standardized questionnaires to ensure they extracted complete information, creating what amounted to a medieval database of sexual behavior that tracked everything from adultery to masturbation across entire communities. The information gathered through confession wasn't kept confidential in the modern sense. While priests couldn't reveal specific details publicly, they used their knowledge to influence community decisions about everything from marriage arrangements to business partnerships. A woman known to have confessed unusual sexual desires might find herself excluded from certain social circles, while a man who admitted to sexual dysfunction could see his political prospects diminish. The confession booth became a tool of sexual social control that reached into every aspect of medieval life, but perhaps most bizarre was how medieval communities dealt with sexual dysfunction and infertility. Rather than viewing these as private medical matters, they became public crises requiring community intervention and supernatural assistance. Villages would organize elaborate rituals designed to restore sexual function, involving everything from pilgrimage to holy sites to the consumption of blessed foods believed to enhance reproductive capability. Medieval medical practitioners developed treatments for sexual problems that combined legitimate herbal remedies with practices that bordered on magical thinking. Men suffering from what we would now recognize as erectile dysfunction were prescribed potions containing ground rhinoceros horn, powdered unicorn hair, and extracts from various plants and animals believed to possess aphrodisiac properties. These treatments were expensive and often dangerous, but they were considered essential for maintaining both personal dignity and social standing. Women's sexual health was treated with equal parts medical intervention and supernatural ritual. Those experiencing difficulty conceiving were subjected to treatments that included sitting over steaming cauldrons of herbal mixtures, wearing amulets containing fragments of saints' relics, and consuming foods arranged in specific patterns believed to encourage fertility. The line between medicine and magic was virtually non-existent when it came to reproductive health, creating a treatment system that was simultaneously elaborate and ineffective. The medieval understanding of sexual desire itself was fundamentally different from modern concepts of libido and attraction. Medieval thinkers believed that sexual desire was influenced by the movement of celestial bodies, the balance of bodily humours, and the presence of supernatural forces that could either enhance or diminish romantic attraction. This led to the development of astrological courtship practices where potential partners consulted star charts and planetary alignments to determine sexual compatibility. Young people seeking romantic partners were advised to consider not just physical attraction and social status, but also the astrological circumstances of their births, the seasonal timing of their courtship, and even the phases of the moon during their intimate encounters. Medieval astrologers created detailed compatibility charts that predicted everything from sexual satisfaction to the likelihood of producing healthy children based on the cosmic conditions surrounding romantic relationships. These astrological considerations extended to the timing of sexual activity within established relationships. Medieval couples were encouraged to consult lunar calendars and planetary charts when planning intimate encounters, with different celestial conditions believed to favour different types of a sexual experience. The full moon was considered optimal for conception, while certain planetary alignments were thought to enhance pleasure or reduce the risk of producing children with physical deformities. The influence of astrology on medieval sexuality created a culture where intimate relationships were subject to cosmic approval, with couples postponing sexual activity for weeks or months while waiting for favourable astrological conditions. This astronomical approach to sexuality reached its peak in royal courts, where the timing of royal consummations and conception attempts were planned by teams of court astrologers working to ensure the most auspicious conditions for producing heirs. Medieval bathing customs added another layer of sexual strangeness to daily life. Contrary to popular belief, medieval people did bathe, but their bathing practices were governed by complex rules about modesty, health, and sexual propriety that created bizarre social situations. Public bathhouses were common in medieval cities, but they operated under strict regulations that separated men and women while simultaneously creating opportunities for sexual encounter that were both forbidden and inevitable. Medieval bathhouses became focal points for sexual tension and social anxiety, with church authorities constantly warning about the moral dangers of communal bathing, while medical experts insisted on its health benefits. The result was a compromise system where bathing was permitted but heavily regulated, with specific days designated for different social groups and elaborate protocols governing everything from conversation to eye contact between bathers. Private bathing was considered a luxury available only to the wealthy, but it came with its own set of sexual complications. Medieval medical texts warned that bathing could increase sexual desire by heating the body and opening the pores, requiring careful timing to avoid conflicts with religious restrictions on sexual activity. Couples were advised to avoid bathing on the same day as planned intimate encounters, lest the combination of warm water and physical cleanliness prove too sexually stimulating. The medieval textile industry even developed specialized clothing designed to manage and control sexual desire. Undergarments weren't just practical necessities, they were tools of sexual regulation designed to either enhance or suppress physical attraction, depending on the circumstances. Wealthy women wore elaborate underclothing that could take hours to remove, creating natural barriers to impulsive sexual encounters, while simultaneously serving as erotic theatre for planned intimate moments. Medieval fashion trends reflected these complex attitudes towards sexuality, with clothing styles that simultaneously concealed and revealed the human form in ways designed to manage sexual desire. The rise and fall of hemlines, necklines, and sleeve lengths weren't just aesthetic choices, they represented ongoing cultural negotiations about appropriate levels of sexual display and the proper management of physical attraction. As we reach the end of our journey through medieval sexual customs, we're left with a picture of a society that was simultaneously obsessed with and terrified of human sexuality. Medieval people created elaborate systems for regulating, understanding, and controlling intimate relationships that reflect both their deep anxieties about sexual desire and their recognition of its fundamental importance to human life. These bizarre customs remind us that every society develops its own ways of managing the universal human experiences of attraction, desire, and intimate connection. While we might laugh at medieval beliefs about wandering wombs and lunar influences on conception, future generations may well find our own sexual customs equally strange and inexplicable. The medieval era shows us that human sexuality has always been more than just a private matter between individuals. It's been a social institution subject to regulation, interpretation, and cultural meaning that reflects the deepest beliefs and anxieties of entire civilizations. Understanding these forgotten customs helps us recognize that our own sexual norms aren't natural or inevitable. They're cultural constructions that continue to evolve as our understanding of human nature and social organization develops. Perhaps most importantly, the strange sexual world of medieval Europe reminds us that beneath all the bizarre customs and regulations were real people struggling to navigate the same fundamental human needs for connection, pleasure, and meaning that we face today. Their solutions may seem ridiculous to us, but they represent genuine attempts to create systems for managing one of the most powerful and mysterious aspects of human experience.